What's up, guys? This is God, Grit, and Glory, and I am your host, Veto Creed. We talk about the stuff that most people stay quiet about: Jesus, business, politics, and occasionally a few conspiracy theories. No scripts, no filters, just straight up truth. So join us as we unravel and speak truth. Hi, this is Veto Creed with God, Grit, and Glory. We are on our part 2 series here about feminism. So let's get into it. So this series is going to be a 3-part series. I talked about some of the more generalized secular views, sort of opinions from different viewpoints, whether they were from Andrew Tate or Tucker Carlson or Nick Fuentes. Some of the more vocal voices within the industry of what, and Matt Walsh, of course, with What is a Woman. These are some of the vocal viewpoints on what people think women roles are and what women are in general. I wanted to, before I jump into some of the details, I wanted to discuss kind of some of the more fundamental things, from like a real standpoint, right? And so, I mentioned in my first podcast about the series is most of my friends are married. Okay, so most of my friends, have been married for at least 5 to 10 years, some 15 to 20, and I have these discussions with them all the time. When I was in my early 20s, I used to be in a youth, basically a Bible study group for young adults, young married couples to be more specific. And I remember some of the problems that arose during these conversations. Women tended to be very vocal about this, and just to kind of give you guys just some background about that group, the reason it fell apart was literally because of a woman. So she kept coming into the middle of our conversations and trying to debunk or belittle our the gospel and putting in her opinions. This is why I think it's important what Paul says: women should have no dominion over a man, and they should be silent in the church. In other words, when there's a gathering of men and they're trying to teach, there's a specific role where women are to be silent. And so this is important because of things like this. I was able to witness this firsthand, and this individual person, I wouldn't say was necessarily a Christian. I don't want to name any names, but they were probably at best maybe an infant Christian in their early infancy. But even then, I don't think so. I think ultimately this person just had no interest in being there. And so she came to the group basically with controversy. I felt like her husband was the one that was dragging her there, and some of her opinions were a little bit more on a personal level. So she sort of was there to dissect and sort of attack. And that's sort of the spirit of Jezebel there, to basically divide and conquer, right? So I wanted to mention that because I remember talking to some of my friends over the years where everybody has different opinions, but it really comes down to facts, right? A lot of my friends have very dysfunctional relationships with their wives. They all sort of share with me, some of the ups, some of the downs, mostly downs, unfortunately. And so they share, where a lot of the conflicts arise, right? So a lot of the conflicts arise mostly, of course, this is a statistical fact too, is more than 50% of it's financial. So what's interesting about that, right? Kind of getting into the weeds here. All right. So if a woman wants to fight her man on the finances, right? Let's just say a man is a provider, and it's really open for interpretation what a decent amount of money is. Some women will be pleased with $50,000 a year. Other women are going to say, yeah, you need to make at least 100, 150, 200, $250,000, whatever it may be. But I don't think that's a humanistic kind of depravity where I don't think you're going to ever have enough. You're always going to want more. You get a little bit of taste of that high life, of those pleasures of life, and you sort of are like, well, I sort of want to make more, right? And so there's always a desire to make more. And so as I'm talking to a lot of these people, they're talking about how most of their arguments start off financially, where the wife is saying, oh, well, you didn't, you're buying all this crap for yourself that you can't pay for, the kids to get a new bike, or this or this or this or that, or you get to go out everywhere, I don't get to do anything, and so there's that, and they're failing to understand that the husband is putting in 10, potentially 8 to 12 hours a day in the work field to try to provide for this family, right? So he's doing exactly what he's called to do, is working by the sweat of his brow, right? So he's going out there, he's providing, he's coming home. I mean, you have to understand he's been physically working somewhere, right? He's been physically working somewhere, and he's coming home, and ultimately he's just being, attacked. The minute he walks in the house, take your shoes off. Why are you dragging mud into the house? Take out the garbage. Put the kids to sleep. You've been gone all day. Blah, 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 blah. She starts ranting, right? And the Proverbs says this, there's nothing worse than a nagging wife, right? They knew about the fact that a nagging wife is about the worst thing you can have. Anybody that's already put in a lot of energy at work and he's sort of spent by the time he gets home, he doesn't want to walk into a household where somebody is, eating out his ear and potentially, pushing on him, right? He wants to walk into a household where it's semi-chaotic, where the kids run up to the door and the kids will hug his leg and the kids say, "Hey, Dad, we missed you. We love you," and follows the wife. The wife needs to be doing this out of pure discipline. In other words, the husband comes in, she looks at him, and she needs to pretend. If she doesn't really want to see him, she needs to pretend that she wants to see him, at least for the kids, right? And I say that loosely, but I think obviously it should be meant and it should be intended. But I think the women need to put in a lot more effort when it comes to this. Women put no effort into this at all, like literally zilch. I think it's important for women to put in effort to show their respect. This is where they're paying their respect to their husband, right? It's sort of like that old, times where the husband was out and hunting for the last, 24 to 48 hours, comes home with a gazelle on his back or a deer on his back, and he's like, "Oh yeah, dinner's served, and now we feast for the next month, right? You got the beef jerky and stuff, and the venison and the beef and everything you sort of put away, right? And so they would be celebrated because you got to catch, and then you're providing for your family for the next couple of weeks or months. And so I think this is important. When a husband enters the home, I think the woman should be happy to see him. She should engage. She should tell him how much I missed him and how much she loves him. So the kids can see this. Because if a wife is sitting on her phone doom scrolling, and then he walks in, and instead of basically saying, "Hey honey, how's it going? How was work? And I made you dinner, and dinner's hot on the plate." You walk in and you are met by your children. Your wife is either nowhere to be seen, or she's on her phone, or she's in her computer or on her laptop, or just lounging around doing nothing, and the house is a mess and there's crap everywhere, and you walk in and you're met by this chaos where you expect to come home sort of to peace, to support, right? But you're met by chaos. You're met by somebody that thinks that you don't even deserve to have a hot plate. You don't even deserve to do this.
Can someone explain to me how a man can go to work all day so his wife can stay home all day, and after a long, hard day at work, he comes home to no punani, no home-cooked meal, and the house is a mess? Like, isn't the point of you staying home all day to make the person who works all day's life a little bit easier, not more stressful? Just saying.
Imagine if men were like this. Imagine you wake up in the morning, you're like, "Yeah, I don't think you deserve for me to make any money for you today. I'm going to go hang out with my friends. I'm going to go bar hopping. I'm going to go fishing." And then that's all you do. Imagine if imagine if men were wired to think the same way that women are wired, right? And so they become complacent, or apathetic, right? Where there's apathy towards this, where they're just doing nothing and they don't care. And then what are you going to do? What type of dominion do you have over a situation like that, right? And this starts to stem into the ways that children perceive you, the way that children perceive relationships. A lot of toxicity is displayed through this because women can't be, obedient, and women cannot be submissive to their husbands. Not only that, they don't show respect. Submissiveness is a parallel with respect. In other words, the husband comes in, the wife is supposed to be there for him. She's supposed to be attentive to him. I have a buddy, one of the very few buddies, where his wife wakes up with him at 5:30 every morning, right? And she makes him breakfast, she makes him coffee, she gets him ready for the day, and she packs him a lunch, and then she goes back to sleep. And she does this out of discipline. Does she have to wake up every morning? No. In fact, 95% of you women out there would never do this for your husbands. And we know that. But she does this out of discipline, her obedience towards him, her love. She does this as a sacrifice because she understands that he's going to go out there. He's going to put in 12 hours in the next day, and he's going to provide just enough food for the table. He's going to exchange value, which is his time, his energy, his essentially his health, depending on what he's doing. If he's doing construction, it's back-breaking work. He's putting in his energy and all this stuff in exchange to provide for you to sit on your phone and doom scroll, right? I mean, I say that very facetiously, of course, but that is the exchange there. And so when a woman isn't doing what she's supposed to be doing, when she has these unrealistic expectations for her husband, yeah, I want you to go out there, I want you to provide, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom, I'm going to sit there. But what does her entire day consist of? Being on her phone for 8.5 to 10 hours? Is that what it consists of? I bet you for any one of you guys, if you were to go to through your wife's phone and check, and she'd probably be, on the phone for at least 6 hours a day, right? And she says, well, I didn't have time, right? Really? Take away her phone for a week. See how productive she becomes. All of a sudden the dishes are going to be clean, the walls are going to be scraped. She's going to clean the baseboards and everything else, hopefully, right? Or she'll just sit around and watch, soap operas and eating bonbons. So, so the point is, I'm not encouraging you to go take away the phone and do all these things to try to, as a response to it. The point I'm telling you is there needs to be more consistency, dually here, right? There needs to be more consistency on both sides where the wife has these expectations where she's like, oh, well, the husband needs to be doing this, the husband needs to be doing that. And then when they don't provide, the wife loses her mind. She literally starts to throw the D word about, which is divorce. She loves to say, hey, I'm not going to have sex with you. You don't want to, you can't provide, or she won't maybe say it, but she'll show it. She just won't be intimate with. She won't want to be intimate with him. She won't try, she won't allow him to touch her. And the relationship gets really toxic because the woman tends to use, I think some of the unhealthiest relationships in this entire world are when women think that they can use that as a weapon. You are in no position to be using that as a weapon. And I'll tell you why. Biblically, it is against the Bible. In fact, it says that your body is not yours. In fact, it belongs to your husband when you get married. You can read it. So, and more importantly, it goes against the entire structure of what being respectable is. You cannot be submissive to a husband when you reject him, when you're constantly denying him from everything, when you're depriving him that God has instilled, right? We have a biological, basically mechanism that craves intimacy, that craves sex, right? So when a woman is intentionally depriving a man of this, that's all it's really doing is it's ultimately only harming her. Because after a while, men will shut down. Men will not want to express their love. They may do it out of frustration. They may do it out of anger or other ways. And then the woman says, oh, I'm starting to resent him because he doesn't treat me right. He doesn't carry me on his shoulders, metaphorically speaking. And it's like, well, what efforts have you put in? Why don't you audit the last 5 years of your marriage, or even the last 6 months of your marriage, or even the last week of your marriage, if you can think back that far? What have you done? Have you put on, a hot plate for him? Have you, invited him into the bedroom and said, hey, let's go fool around, right? And I say this very openly because I'm an open person. I think this needs to be talked about. People do not talk about this. There's like this stigma where they said, oh, when you don't want to mesh Christianity and all this with sex and with everyday life. That's life. It's a real thing, right? So this is why this show is unfiltered, and this is why we're raw and unfiltered here, because we want to talk about these topics. We want to talk about these matters, right? So so the point is when a man comes home, he's expecting that. He expects that, to be a norm, right? And so when the wife doesn't do that, she's not attentive, she's not responsive, she doesn't want to do anything for him. But then meanwhile, she expects him to pay for all the bills, to make sure the lights are on, the mortgage is paid, the car payments are paid, the insurance is paid, the kids' schools are paid. I mean, the list is long. And then her wish list on Amazon. Go and look at her Amazon account and see how much actually she spent in the last 2 months. Check your credit card statements. Look at how much she's bought for herself, right? And the women will say, well, I take care of the kids. I earn half to keep too. No, that's not how it works. The hardest job in the world, they say, oh, being a mother is the hardest job in the world. Really? Compared to what? Plowing concrete all day? Picking up walls and framing, doing roofing in 100-degree weather? Is that you want to compare? I'd love for a woman to be sent out in the construction field to have to rip off shingles off of a roof all day, to go basically mix concrete. You're going to find out really fast, very, 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 very fast, that the tolerance for pain is significantly higher in men versus women. They have a significantly higher tolerance when it comes to doing daily things, right? Not repetitive things, right? Women tend to do more repetitive things like, oh, I have to feed the baby, I have to take care of this, I have to give him a bath, I have to do that, I have to clean, I have to, cook. They're repetitive. They're not physically hard. It's not physically hard to load up the dishwasher, This isn't 100 years ago where women had to go into the backyard and take all the clothes and put it in a bucket and then warm it up on a fire, make it warm, make their own soap, mix it in, wash it thoroughly, go down to the river, rinse it out, come back, hang it on a clothes wire, make sure it doesn't stay out all night so it doesn't get rain or musky or nasty smell or stuff or dirty. Though that's the amount of energy it took just to do laundry back in the days. Right now, women won't even want to do laundry. They don't even want to sit down and throw a couple of loads of laundry in a week, let alone every day, or they don't want to cook anything, or they don't want to clean the dishes, which is just removing, you rinse off, you throw them in the dishwasher, throw your tablet in, and you're done. Most of these tasks, if a woman really, put some elbow grease into it, she can accomplish a lot of this in a few hours, right? And so I say this just as just loose example, everyday life, right? And women will say, well, the husband has to be helpful. Well, husbands are helpful, and I know this for myself. I walk around all day. I'm literally like a Roomba, right? So I walk around, and the thing is if I see something on the floor, I pick it up. I put it somewhere where it belongs. I keep walking. I pick up. I remove. I move. I see a glass. I put it, in the sink. I see this. I move it, and this is sort of my compulsive behavior. I sort of do this anyways. And then my wife will periodically say, "Well, you don't do much around here." I said, "You'd be surprised." If I don't do, I don't try to, tackle chores all at once where I'm like, hey, I'm going to, sweep up the entire house, right? I'll periodically, I clean up my upstairs by myself. I vacuum, I, wipe everything, I dust everything. I do a majority of everything upstairs myself and my garage and obviously the entire exterior of my house and stuff like that. So, but when it comes to, say, the kitchen area, the family, the common areas where the kids are, I expect my wife to do it. And I'm very clear about it. I expect her to wash the dishes. I expect her to do everything and tidy up her space because that's where she spends most of her time. It's only fair for her to clean up her own area, right? And even with fairness aside, it's kind of an obligation of a wife, right? To take care of the household, to take care of the common areas, right? And so you have a lot of women that are very domineering, so that refuse to do this. And they say, oh, it needs to be a 50-50, blend. It needs to be a 50-50 thing, and then they'll go to, these are the same women that'll go to dinner with men and say, oh, how dare you not pay for my dinner? Well, which one is it? Do you want to be the domineering, woke feminist, or do you want to be the sincere kind of woman that just sort of is passive and just allows things to sort of, go their natural way, right? And so this is where, I have a problem with this. I have a problem with this because, everybody wants the best of both worlds. They want to be treated a certain way. They want all, you have this fairy tale kind of illusion of what our world is, right? I think that a lot of women in our world, this is actually a statistical fact, there are more single women than single men, right? Is because women have decided that, we don't need men anymore, right? Is that what it is? Yeah, they feel that, oh, I'm going to go into their, into the work field. I'm going to get a career. I'm going to do all this. But the problem is by the time they get back into reality, in other words, they snap out of it, no men want them. They've gotten to a point where they're literally intolerable. Like you can't tolerate them. They're very opinionated. They're very aggressive. They're very feministic. They're very woke. They've been brainwashed with all their ideologies from their local universities. They're no longer, that innocent kind of malleable mindset where they can adjust and quite literally back to the basics, submit to their husbands. They can't. They are incapable of doing that because they've grown up in such a toxic environment. And we're not even talking about the sex element of it. And then she slept with probably half the football team, right? I mean, body counts are a big concern. I mean, you got most women that brag about this and said, yeah, my body count's 200 or I heard this from somebody. They were bragging. She's like, almost 1,000 people. That is disgusting. That is absolutely disgusting. Like, I can't imagine. I just can't imagine how God looks at this world where somebody, claims to be proud of having sex with 1,000 men. It's like he you have the prostitute at the well that he approached, and he had sympathy on her, and he's like, oh, you have multiple husbands, you don't have one. And she was a wife of a few husbands, more than one, of course. I mean, you have maybe 4 or 5 husbands that she went through. But the crazy part is imagine being proud that you've slept with 1,000 different men. I mean, it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. We live in a world where, they do all this, and then they turn around and say, hey, well, now I want to settle down. Now I want a man that will respect me. I want a man that's going to treat me right. He's going to be kind to me. He's going to provide. He's going to go to the gym. He's going to take care of himself. He's going to take care of the kids. And the laundry list of requirements it's long. It's never ending, right? And so you look at that list and you think, where's the reality here? Is there a loss of like, perception here, or are you just in the clouds? I mean, you want all of this for what exactly? What are you given in exchange for this? I mean, if we're going to be as exclusively transactional here, you're basically, you've given away your entire youth, right? You're in your 30s. You're no longer a spring chicken. You've given away your virginity. I mean, way past that. Let's just say the average body count for women when they're in college, I mean, it's pretty egregious. By the time they've hit college, on average, and this statistic will vary from regions and areas, but they say roughly around 15 to 20 men. I mean, that's pretty disgusting. If a woman's had sex with 15 or 20 men, and of course I was using the extreme where some women have had potentially 1,000 different men they slept with, and it's like, that's still a lot. That's, you're comparing, potentially all of those men together, and maybe some of them were relationship and some of them were quite literally just flings or, one night stands. But no matter how you look at it, you have this existence in our world where women have these very unrealistic expectations, where they've created sort of a life for them, and then they want everybody else to sort of adapt to their own basically lives, right? So whatever they think is reality. So women in a lot of sense have basically started to create the norms, right? Sort of created the norms. And unfortunately, that we are, as a society, are all to blame for it. Men specifically, because I think with enabling this, this becomes a real problem. I mean, governments have sort of been big brothers to this. I mean, they've provided all this unnecessary law that they've created for, say divorces or separations, or the support that women will get when, they leave a husband, with the courtships and the custody battles and everything like that. Our system has been created in America to sort of work against the male, where women basically go from being dependent on a husband to quite literally dependent on the government, right? And so even funny topic about everything going on with this WIC and Section 8 and food stamps and stuff, where EBT, all their EBTs about to be taken away, and you have a lot of people, specifically blacks, getting online and they're ranting about, if they take our EBT, we're going to go loot Walmarts and Targets and grocery stores. And the crazy part about it is it's mostly women. If you go online and you watch these videos, they're women. And I'll tell you why. It's actually a very common sense situation, right? You have the woman that left the man that was dependent on the government. Now the government is her new husband. The government has been paying her Social Security checks, or her, her WIC, or her whatever support she's received from the government, her Section 8, all these things. And all of a sudden, basically Big Brother Trump over there said, you know what, you're cut off. And so you're going to see a huge impact, not specifically on men. There are a few. They're mostly woke, probably, guys that refuse to work. But you're going to see a lot of women being affected by this more than men. Because who is more dependent on the government? Is it men or women? By majority, it's women. And in fact, it's a staggering statistic, but the divorce rate, specifically with women, and this is black women, is actually significantly higher. It's over 80%, right? It's a staggering over 80% that men grow up with no fathers, right? So fatherless societies, right? And so when you grow up in a fatherless society, of course, what's going to happen with those fatherless societies? You're going to essentially raise weak men, and you're going to raise feministic and entitled women, right? You're going to raise them to basically think however you think, and more specifically, you're going to raise them to think wrong, not the right way, right? They're not they're not grounded with the right morals. There's no dad around that instills values and ethics. He's not going to be saying, hey, you got to provide for your family. Hey, you got to do this. You got to do that. You have to be a hard worker. You have to take care of your wife. You have to love your wife. You have to do all these things. But she sort of raises the woman to say, yeah, men are all, assholes and men are all evil and they're, they do this and they do that. And, you need to stay away from them and they're all bad news and you never want to, cross paths with them. So as you're dealing with a lot of this stuff, you start to understand, where is all this coming from? Why are women the way they are? Well, just go back to the roots, go back to the roots because the roots are everything. I mean, when a child is, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, they don't know any better. They all they see is what their surroundings are. They're sort of adapting and adopting what they see around them. They're picking up on habits. They're picking up on words. They're picking up on behaviors. So this is kind of a common sense element. So if a kid, by the time he's, 12 or 13 years old, he grows up either with no dad or an absent dad or a very feministic kind of domineering woman, what type of, behavior is going to be elicited from the male, right? When a guy doesn't have control over his own household, you're going to have a very toxic environment where kids are going to be in a more toxic environment. There's going to be a lot more, domestic violence. You're going to have basically a lot of back and forth, right? And so, and by the way, I don't encourage anybody, on either side, whether it's the male or the female, to be, domestically violent towards their partners, right? I mean, the best way, the best, therapy is to basically talk it over. And if you can't do that, maybe take some time away from each other for maybe a few hours or a few days, and to kind of let situations de-escalate. I mean, people tend to be very irrational in these situations, so they'll respond emotionally. They'll respond in a way where it's not needed, right? And so, anyways, that being said, not to go on a huge rant here about this, but those are sort of the elements. And when I talk about this, I want people to understand. I mean, a lot of these issues they can be solved. We are. As men called to be certain ways, but and the thing is what's interesting, if a guy doesn't receive, the compassion from his wife, if he doesn't receive any of these things, what ultimately, unfortunately, tends to happen is he finds it elsewhere, right? And I can't say this enough because pornography is a really big problem in our society. Right? I mean, this is why OnlyFans, and I mentioned that on my previous episode, OnlyFans is one of the most profitable companies in the entire world because men are now turning to these websites where they can quietly and discreetly communicate with somebody on the other side, where they can talk about things or watch certain things or request certain things, to be done by that individual. Maybe and the majority of these people, disgustingly enough, are married guys. These are married men. These are men that don't get this in their own household. So they're turning to pornography. They're turning to OnlyFans. They're turning because they're craving these engagements with women. They're craving this intimacy that they don't get at home with their own households, right? And so, I mean, that's what happens a lot. And unfortunately, on the more extreme side, is men will actually cheat. Men will go into, their work environment and they'll cheat on their wives, with secretaries and colleagues and stuff like that because they're not being fed at home, right? And ultimately, I hate to say it, but everybody needs to eat. We are a biological, human, and we have cravings as individual human beings. God created us that way, and if we're not being fed at home, a lot of people will look for that craving elsewhere. They're going to look for it elsewhere. And I bring that to people's attention so they understand that there can be some devastating consequences long term. And this is not just for the secular world. In fact, I think pornography and, even cheating and infidelity is a big concern amongst, evangelical Christianity as well. I mean, you see that a lot in the churches. I mean, you walked up to your pastor and you'd ask him, he'd probably wouldn't tell you exactly who did it, but he could probably tell you a good percentage of the people struggle with this, right? I know personally friends and, family members that have struggled with this over the years, whether it's infidelity or specifically pornography. I too, I'll admit, when I was in my early 20s, I struggled with pornography. It's a real problem, and it could be very addicting, and it could be very domineering over your everyday life, and it can dictate a lot of things. And like I said in our previous podcast, I'm going to expand on that a little bit. because it's a very important topic, and I want people to understand just the repercussions of pornography in general. But that being said, I just want people to understand this specific series was a little bit more on sort of the psychology and the reasoning behind, men and women roles, right? It's very important for women to understand where men sit, where men stand, I should say, on these matters. And I call out a lot of you men, a lot of you weak men out there that need to take charge, need to take control of their households, need to, go out this, with wisdom, with encouragement. Specifically, a lot of you men are weak. You will think with your other head versus this head up here in your brain, the God-given wisdom that God's instilled with you, in you, I should say, over, maybe some temporary, satisfaction, So, and this goes both ways for men and women, but men tend to think with the wrong parts in the moment, and then they don't fix the problems. The problems are never resolved because they want to find a temporary solution to get by it, but the problems were never solved. There was never a solution to the problem, and so the issues linger, or worse enough, they'll build, and ultimately they what will happen is there's significant layers and layers upon layers of sort of resentment and problems that arise, right? Because they were never talked about, they were never resolved. You don't understand why certain things were done, or or why certain things were thought, or maybe certain reactions happened. So I say this because it's important to understand you don't want a relationship that's going to be constantly pushing you in opposing directions, or you don't want to be in a relationship where they're going to be constantly, two rams butting up against each other. You want there to be a good harmony there. But the point is we're both sort of expected to have our roles, right? Men are supposed to be called to be providers. Men are supposed to be called to be protectors. That's our job, is to protect our family. I mean, if a burglar breaks into our house, I got plenty of ammo that will get him off my property pretty fast. There's a lot of people out there that are like, I don't own a gun because it's inhumane and da-da-da, or my kids, it's too dangerous. Come on, use your common sense, get a safe, or store it in a very safe place. Don't have it loaded, maybe have multiple ways of doing it. But the point I'm saying is we're called to be these protectors, right? Of our households, over our wives, over our kids, over everything. And most of you men out there are not those. You're not protectors. You are not protectors. You can be in a park and somebody will hit on your wife right in front of you, and you won't be able to do anything. You know why? Because you're weak. You're a weak man, right? And so we are called to be meek, right? And meek is M-E-E-K, meek. As in, we are called to be that lion, that fierce lion within that is tamed, right? We are a tamed lion. In other words, when we are faced with problems, or we're faced with fight or flight mode, we have to be able to react, right? In a sense where, if our kids are in danger, if our families are in danger, we have to react. We have to respond. And I think this is important because most men are not that. They're not providers. They're not protectors. They're weak. In fact, I think if we ever went to war, we'd probably lose, because we're one of the weakest countries when it comes to men. Men are no longer being formed as real men. They're these soy boys that love their lattes in the morning, and with their man bun and their skinny jeans and their, no socks, right? And that probably specifically talks about a lot of you guys out there. And hey, don't get me wrong, I love wearing these pretty vibrant shirts, but for those of you that can't see it in this podcast, I'm wearing a very vibrant shirt with that's blue, and it has pink flamingos on it. You could still, dress, loud and appropriate, but at the same time, be masculine and be men, where you have a stance, you have an opinion, you have some value system that you stand by, and you're not going to be shaken. You're not going to be dismantled because, you're wanting sex in the moment, or you want to compromise, or you just don't want the conflict. So I don't want the conflict. So I'm not going to do what the Bible asks me of me, or I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm just going to take the easy way out, right? It's being complacent, right? A lot of men these days are quite literally complacent. And they always spend all of their energy on video games and other stuff that doesn't matter. And when it comes to raising your children, being consistent in your discipline, trying to work with your wife and in situations where, you have to, try to, I don't want to use the word discipline because, your wife isn't one to be disciplined per se. But in a sense, maybe teach her life lessons, have conversations with her, instill values in her, explain stuff to her where she needs to be, submissive and stuff like that. You men need to do this. You need to put your foot down, right? Quite literally put your foot down. This is what we're called to be. We're called to be leaders, but we're also called to be worth being followed, right? So if you're not worth being followed, a woman's never gonna follow you. How can you be a leader if you're not worthy of leadership, right? So I think men need to step it up, and I think men need to wake up, and they need to understand the fact that you can only be a leader if you're worth being basically followed, right? So, you have to put on the armor of this. In other words, you have to build character. You have to build a wisdom and knowledge and understand what it takes to be a leader, right? Some of you out there that are watching didn't grow up with a dad, you didn't grow up with, he said, I grew up with a strong mother. Well, sometimes that's not a good thing because women they're going to teach you different values. They're not going to teach you the common sense stuff. They're not going to teach you what it's going to take to be a man no matter what, right? And I think to understand what a man is, you have to understand that we're willing to do anything. Let's just say we get in a fight with our spouse or with somebody at work or whatever happens, we still provide. We're still there for our children. We're still doing what we're called to do. We don't just throw our hands up in the air and say, I don't feel like it today. I'm going to walk away from the situation and I'm just going to go play video games or do this and that. I mean, some of us may do that, and there's very few of us, and I wouldn't even call those people men. I'd probably call them still boys or children, because anybody that turns to video games in the time of need and instead of building character and going out and providing and doing stuff that much harder, you turn to an easy way out. And a lot of men will do this with other dependencies as well, whether it's alcohol or drugs or something of that nature, instead of coming to God or coming to some sort of wise path where they can instill value and instill truth and instill something in their lives, right? So this is very important. And so as I sort of expand on this, I've gone into some of the weeds, and I'm trying to talk about very realistic situations, everyday life kind of situations, right? Where we're met with these these challenges, right? And we're going to be met with these, and they're never going to be the same. I mean, you can't say every challenge is going to be the same, but I challenge the women out there to be nice to your husbands, be submissive to your husbands, love them, initiate sex, be romantic, I mean, whatever you got to do in the bedroom to spice it up. I mean, men, love your husbands, do what you're called to do your part. You can do it all you want. I mean, I say, you continue to pray about it, that God instills some wisdom on your wives, and but lead by example so they can see the fact that you're being righteous in the eyes of God. Sometimes we're called to do things, and I think ultimately there are certain situations where more extreme measures are required, and because the reality of it is this. I mean, we're all human, right? So there are certain situations where the wife says, well, I'll just give you an example, right? So the wife says, oh, you don't provide for me, and she starts bickering, and then all of a sudden, you're doing everything. You get a second job, or you take on some overtime hours just to make sure that she stops bickering, and then you get that extra hours or that extra shift, and you provide even more so, and then you catch up on your bills and stuff like that, and you are starting to put some money on the away in the nest egg a little bit, and she starts complaining even more so. All right. And what's crazy about it, if the roles were flipped, right? And you say, hey, you're not providing, the service that you're supposed to be providing, right? Let's just say it's strictly transactional, right? The husband is supposed to provide X amount of dollars for the family and this and that, and the woman's supposed to provide this and that, let's say intimacy or take care of the household or the kids. And let's just say the wife isn't doing any of her roles. Let's just say the woman is literally sitting at home, watching TV or doom scrolling. You come home, she's like, you got to cook, you got to clean, you got to take care of the kids. I've been doing it all day. Now it's your turn, right? So she literally clocks out when you walk in the door, and she thinks that now it's your job, right? And says, I've been doing this full time, and now you need to do it, right? And so you're asked to step into the role and sort of take on her job as she sort of tag teams you into the situation, right? And interestingly enough, she walks away from the situation, and she sort of goes and does what she wants to do. And she says, okay, I've done my time. And this is sort of like a dual effort, right? Is that normal? Do you guys think that's a normal response? Is that how things should be? Is for a lot of you people out there that are self-employed or, that work really hard at it, do you guys leave your work at home, or I should say at work, or do you bring it home, right? And sort of it's like, I think women have this illusion where they sort of think, oh yeah, I changed 5 diapers, now it's your turn. That's not how it works. You are the nurturer. You take care of this child. And from a Christianity perspective, women are called, unfortunately for you women, your curse is to childbear and to nurture and to raise these children. That is what you're called to do. You are called to take care of them. And that has no limits. You know what I'm saying? So for those of you out there that are claiming, oh, my husband needs to do, midnight feedings or 3 a.m. feedings, and we take turns, or no, he does it solely. That's not how it works. Especially if he's the main breadwinner, you need to be doing that yourself. You need to get up in the middle of the night. You need to feed the child. And on top of that, I encourage you to get up and make him breakfast in the morning, even before he leaves for work. That's what you need to be doing. I know a lot of you are not going to agree to that, but I think that's what needs to be happening. And you would see how the relationship would turn. The problem is that I see in a lot of these relationships is they're willing to give a little bit, but they expect a lot back, right? So they're investing one gesture, but they expect 100 in return, right? And sort of that's not how it works. It's the cup is always needing to be filled, right? It's sort of like fuel. You can't expect to put in one little, compliment or one little situation and think that, oh, now my husband owes me everything in the world, right? And for a lot of you, if you really reflected on, the relationship that you're in now, and you looked at what do I actually do for this relationship? Am I intimate with my husband? Do I engage in intimacy with him? Do I, come up to him? Do I hug him? Do I kiss him? Do I pay him a compliment? Do I do anything that is supportive? Do I do anything that is submissive? When he says, hey, can you do this for me? Yes, honey, of course, absolutely. Or do you do it with a begrudged attitude? Fine, I'll do it just because I have to, right? And I don't want to piss you off. And you sort of do it. It's kind of like, well, what's the point? Or a woman that, you engage intimacy with her, and she turns around and says, okay, fine, get it over. Let's get this over with. And she sort of just lays there like a log. And you think to yourself, why do I even need you for this if you're not going to be involved, right? And that's the unfortunate response that you're going to get out of a lot of men where it's not really engaging. And men, they sort of get burned out where they're going back and forth with the woman, and they're doing what they can. And I guarantee you, for all you men out there, especially the married men that will be watching this, I guarantee you a majority of you guys are the ones that are engaging in the sex, in the intimacy. Most women are not capable or very responsive or attentive to this. They're unaware that this is sort of like a dual requirement in a marriage, right? To keep the fire alive. It's required on both sides. And women get lazy more so than men, because men are wired a different way, and they're wired to be a certain way when it comes to this. And so men tend to be a little bit, loosely put, they say horny, right? So versus women tend to be a little bit more passive about it. And so this creates a real problem. And I talk about these topics because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, men specifically, that are probably sitting there, and they share this frustration, and they share this perspective on this, right? And they don't know how to solve this, and how do we fix this? I have a really, really good friend, close friend of mine, where he goes home and sees his wife periodically because he's always working all over the country. And he has a remote job. And so anytime he comes home, she's at his throat. They're having these debacles. They're having these very aggressive exchanges, and more specifically coming from her. And, then she complains when he's gone, or you're never home, you don't provide, you don't do this, you don't make enough money. She's just wearing him down. And so when he comes home, he's like a begging dog. He comes to her and he has to sort of beg her for sex. And like I can't stress this enough. For any woman out there that is using sex as a weapon or using it as some sort of bargaining chip, shame on you. Shame on you. You have absolutely no right, and it's extremely unbiblical to do that. Your body is not your own. You should never be doing this. There is really only one time in a woman's cycle where she could do this and get away with it from a biblical standpoint is when she's on her period. So when a woman's on her period, she's unclean, and ultimately, even by old Torah rules, they were sort of, they were excused from connecting on this level, right? Which is fine. And I think this is God being sort of accommodating to women. He sort of gave woman a week break and says, hey, you can have these, 5 to 10 days off. And then outside of those days, there's intimacy, right? And so this is important. I think it's extremely important because these are things that men truly do need in their lives. I think it's an important role, and I think it's not talked about enough. I think men are probably, and men tend to be really quiet about this. Men are quiet about this because men tend to keep a lot of things to themselves. They're sort of like, exploding inside, but they don't have anybody to come to. They don't have anybody to share this with, where anybody, sort of, kind of agrees with them. And who would you go to? You're one of your best friends or your dad. I mean, it would be an awkward conversation. You, of course, can't go to your wife about this because she doesn't care and she doesn't want to listen, and she'll get defensive, or she'll start telling you why she thinks you need to do this and this and this and that, right? And so the reality of it is, a lot of us are sort of left in the dark on these topics, right? And so as we're talking about this, I want to expand on this a little bit more, and we're sort of running out of time. I might try to cut this thing under an hour. We're sitting at already 47 minutes on this episode here. But I want people to understand that, and I may have to turn this into a 4-part series because, I have only grazed the surface of the book here with some generalizations and some opinions and stuff on this, but I want to expand on this a little bit in our next topic and in our next part. So this is part 2 currently on this matter, but I think it's important for people to understand the importance of this, and once you get the big picture, the macro picture, right, the full spectrum view, and you start understanding that Satan's role is to destroy a marriage, right? And he is easily able to do it through whom? Through the weaker vessel, which is the wife. He's done that in the Garden of Eden, and nothing's changed. He still continues to do it through the weaker vessel. He'll do it through, temptations or trials or disputes or fights or conflicts, or he'll do it where he hijacks the woman. He'll hijack her through different forms, whether it's through intimacy, whether it's through control, whether it's through manipulation, whether it's through, infidelity. And, unfortunately, who's raising our wives? Is it society? Yes. And more specifically, social media. If your wife spends, 2 to 5 hours a minimum a day on social media, what is she watching there? You have to understand, if she spends, even an hour a day watching other videos of other families or other husbands or other wives or God forbid, a bunch of, provocative stuff, what is her brain being filled with? What kind of nonsensical kind of illusions or fairy tales where, because this is where women will unfortunately get a lot of their understanding, and they'll say, oh, well, that family over there is doing it this way, and that family's that, and you know how good you have it, and this. What are you talking about? You have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know how this family's living, and social media is an illusion. That's not how life is. None of these people are telling you what's truly going on. There's a lot of stuff that happens behind closed doors. So for anybody thinking, oh, well, the grass is greener on the other side, and it's just like that, and it's just, we're the only ones. No, really, the reality of it is we all fall short of the grace of God, right? So in other words, we're all sinners and we all make mistakes. But more importantly, we all have room for growth. We all have room for improvement. We all have an ability to fix some of the wrongs we've done or some of the habits we've formed. And a majority of us, we continue doing it. It's like they say the definition of insanity, right? Is keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Like, how many times are you going to keep doing the same thing, beating a dead horse and expect different results? I mean, for the women out there that are getting, the cold shoulder from their husband, have you tried to engage them? For the men out there that are getting zero responsiveness from your wife, have you tried to engage them? It goes both ways on some of these matters, but obviously I know that a lot of this can be one-sided, because what happens is, there is one side that tends to love more than the other side. It's just unfortunately how it is. I mean, there's the husband will love the wife more than the husband, and the wife loves the husband, or vice versa, where you'll get a much different relationship. It's very seldom do you get a relationship where the husband and the wife equally love each other. And this is just, unfortunately, the ugly truth, right? The ugly truth about this is reality that we tend to be in a situation where there's some of these things can be changed, but they can definitely be improved, right? There's always room for improvement. As we're building relationships with our spouses, as we're building relationships with our soon-to-be spouses, we have to understand that these roles have to be set early in, right? We have to make sure that the wife, she's not going to be blindsided when she walks into this. She has to understand where you stand on this matter, right? Where are our stances on this? Like, how do people feel they should act in a relationship? I remember when I was dating my wife, I did not hide my true colors. I said, you know what? As a husband, I expected her to be a good helpmate and stuff like that. And I remember I would ask her to do things for me when we'd go out over to the in-laws' house, and her mom was like, how dare he tell you what to do? You're not even married yet. And she's like, well, I don't have a problem with it, and it's fine, and I'm willing to help. And she's like, no, you shouldn't allow that. And, he can't be bossing you around, and you understand. See, that's where it comes from. It comes from toxic parents, toxic relationships, where family members think that they're sort of entitled to this or this or this or that, right? And they want to set unrealistic expectations for their daughters and their sons and whatnot. And they sort of ruin the entire reality or the trajectory of where God intended us to go, right? And so they intentionally drive wedges in between our relationships and so forth. And so, like I said, as I'm kind of expanding on this topic, we're going to roll this one up. I wanted to sort of do sort of a conclusion and sort of a summary of what we talked about. I mean, I've talked about some of the daily roles and the daily encounters that you may have with a spouse, and sort of the reasoning, the logic, and stuff like this back and forth. I mean, I'm going to get into the meat a little bit more as we sort of expand on this a little bit more and talk about this. I think it's important to understand that this topic is pretty much endless. There could be like a plethora of different perspectives, so many ideas and stuff to build off of and weave off of, and sort of this conversation could be a 100-part series if I really wanted to expand on it. Because there's this specific book that I have in front of me here has 100 different issues just within the biblical setting of where women and men are as far as egalitarianism versus complementarianism. That's the thing, is once you start talking about any individual topic, that topic can expand and it can get larger and larger and larger. And so, like I said, I'm going to try to cover as much as I can. I think most likely I'm going to expand this and do a 4-part series, but I guess we'll have to see with how much I accomplish in the next episode, right? And we're already rolling to the last hour here. And like I said, I want to leave you with this kind of the last couple keynotes here is, we are all called to be, good Christians, right? So for all of you out there that are sort of hard on yourself and saying, hey, maybe I'm not doing enough. Maybe I should try harder. Bingo. You, I'm not worried about. It's you out there. It's my husband. It's him. He's the one that needs to fix himself. It's my wife. She's nagging. She's all this. And it's you that are the problem. It's you. It's you out there that are the victims. There's nothing more toxic in a relationship as when somebody plays the victim role. I remember when our pastor was at our engagement party, and he was giving us some lifelong advice. He's like, the one that plays the victim is the one that's going to lose, right? So he's like, never go into a relationship thinking that you're going to win this by playing victim. We don't deserve anything In fact, we deserve nothing. Whether it's certain type of a talent or an accomplishment or something monetary like a job or a career or anything like that, we don't deserve anything, or a spouse. We don't deserve anything. We deserve nothing, right? So playing victim is always going to get you in trouble first. So for anybody out there, that's what you do, and you're like, oh, I'm innocent, and I have nothing to work on. It's him. He never does this. He never does that. Well, you probably have a much bigger problem than you realize, because we all have, room for improvement. I will admittedly say that I have a huge area for I can improve. I could be a little bit more kind and more soft-hearted and more, a better listener and stuff like that. There's a lot of things where I could fix, certain situations and maybe, evolve them to be a little bit better. I mean, we all have room for improvement. And for those out there that are not willing to admit this, you are the one that is probably the problem maker in the relationship, because both spouses have to be equally willing to admit that they're wrong, right? And so to be able to admit that you're wrong is the ability to say sorry. And if any one of you, if you've been in a relationship for at least 1 year and you haven't been able to say sorry, or you haven't said sorry in the last year, then you're the problem. I will tell you this to your face. You are the problem, because I will tell you that there is no way that an entire year can go by and you've done nothing wrong. You've said nothing wrong. You're innocent. It's all him. There's no way. It's impossible. That means you just are either two things. Either you're a fool and you are completely oblivious to your own issues, which is just, that's probably worst case scenario, or you're just in denial. You're in denial and you refuse to acknowledge the fact that you have a problem. You refuse to admit the fact that you have room for improvement. You have room for growth. All of us are called to improve. All of us are called to be better, to strive to fix things and to mend things, right? And so, hopefully, and for all of you people out there that have been doing this for a couple decades, or rolling into your, 10-year, 20-year marriages, anniversaries here. Hopefully you've already learned by that point, what needs to be done. I know for a lot of you, unfortunately, the damage has already been done. You've taken on a 10-year cycle, 20-year cycle of this where, the wife is sort of domineering the household, and it's turned into a very toxic environment where the guy doesn't have a say and he doesn't have an opinion, he doesn't have a voice, and sort of like that. And it's sort of like the point of no return. But for many of you guys, which, by the way, just to mention, that still can be fixed, that with enough work and enough energy and enough prayer and enough consistency, there is going to be, you're going to be swimming upstream now. I'm going to tell you that much, because guess what? Your wife has gotten used to getting away with everything. Your wife has gotten used to getting her way, so it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a task that many of us will not want to take on, but I think it's going to be a task that many of us should take on if we're in that position. But, and then of course, for the rest of us that, are early stages, I think it's important to understand that, there's still an opportunity and, to make things right, to create the proper expectations, the right structure, and to sort of create an environment where we see ourselves for the rest of our lives, right? Sort of, take on the right roles where, you're doing your part, you're biblically, you're doing what you can be doing. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not telling you never wash a dish in your life. I mean, I've washed plenty of dishes. I was a single man. I lived, by myself for well over a decade. So I understand what it means to take care of the household, to cook, to clean, to do all these things, to take care of your own laundry. The point I'm making is to set expectations for, the decision making, the massive decision making, the overall, structure of the household. Who is ultimately overseeing? Who is the captain of the ship? Who's the one that makes the last call? Is it the woman? Is it the wife? Or is it you? Is it you as the male, right? And so this is important. I think you guys should definitely dwell on this. You should think about it. You should pray about it. And you should continue to strive to improve things in your surroundings. So thank you for tuning in. This is Veto Creed with God, Grit, and Glory. And I thank you.